Hello, and welcome to the DOS Champions podcast. It is the 15th of March, the Ides of March, Alex. It's an auspicious occasion.
The waters of March. It's the end of all pain. It's the joy in your heart.
A2, Alex. But yeah, we're coming at you guys with a flavor of the week. This is our new jam. We're kind of taking things as they come, and want to talk about not necessarily hot button topics, but stuff that we see that's going on in the community and just topics we find interesting in general. So what we're going with this week is who is the most overrated player in the U.S. men's national team setup? We're going to hit this from a couple different directions. First, we'll talk about a little bit of crowd sourcing that we did, see what things got upvotes on Reddit, and then by the fans, who we think is the most overrated by the fans, who we think is the most overrated by the coach, and then a brief, closing about what we think is kind of an odd player type to be overrating. So, Alex, how's it going?
It's going okay. I've been trying to diet and not eat sugar, but I'm still fat AF. And after 3 or 4 days of not eating sugar and working out, I haven't lost a single pound. So I'm a little bit down in the dumps. But everything else is cool. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Been really busy at work, but we persevere. We keep going. We work more hours.
And we do more podcasts.
Yeah, we podcast at night. That's what it is. Weather's getting warmer. It's nice when you wake up and it's like 32, and then you get to leave work and it's like 60 degrees out. So I'm hoping those 60 degrees stick around longer as we move into spring. But yeah, should we get into what Reddit had to say about this?
I would love to, man. Reddit's actually got they've got some really great opinions out there, and the opinions of these folks were overwhelming, I guess you could say.
Yeah, so we got 3 points here from what we saw going on the Reddit thread we created for this. The first thing is that Pepe, I'm sorry guys, but Pepe led the poll. He had 122 upvotes when people were commenting about him. That's a significant amount more than the second place one.
Yeah, it's like 4 times what anybody else got. There was like a cluster of players who received like 31-ish votes, but Pepe had 122 and like led the polls by a effing landslide.
Yeah, and we'll get more into why we think that might be the case in a little bit. But for now, we'll just leave it at that. Most people that we interacted with on Reddit said Pepe. This second one, though, I really, really love this. So in second place was anyone we call world class. And I love this because it speaks to the hyperbolic nature of U.S. men's national team fandom.
Oh, I was a huge fan of it. And yeah, again, the answer was anybody that we consider to be world class is overrated. And he highlighted players like Dest, Pulisic, Reyna. And it was such a great answer because we don't have any world class players, and I'm pretty sure we never have.
Yeah, I don't believe that we ever have. Maybe at one point in time against Belgium in the 2014 World Cup, we had the Secretary of Defense, and maybe he was world class. But I don't know that anybody's gotten, much better than that. Really, when you look at it big picture wise, being world class is you got to be like top 3 or something like that. There aren't a ton of world class players otherwise. What does world class mean?
So the guy who said it, by the way, I got to give him a shout. Flaps Fisher, FLAPSFISHER. So I just want to give him a shout because it was a truly fantastic answer.
Yeah, it really was. And then the last one that we are going to mention here is Tyler Adams. There seems to be a lot of rumbling around him, and people actually get fairly defensive about him too, which
extremely defensive. Yep.
I don't know if that's a sign of being overrated or not, but I have
think it is. Yeah, I have a feeling it is. The guy is totally obnoxious and acts like those kids in third grade that I liked watching with my mouth open from time to time. But Calcio Moneyball has been beating this drum for a long time.
Yeah, I can see where people would be coming from saying that Tyler Adams is a little bit overrated. And just to make it clear here, overrated does not necessarily mean bad. You know, I think there's a lot of that happens in people's minds where if you say that somebody is better than conventional wisdom, or that most people are acting like they are, that means that they're bad. it, it can just mean they're not quite as good as maybe the majority of people think that player is. And I think that's the case for Tyler Adams. He is our best six still, but there are some clear lackings with him. And actually, I'm going to kind of transition into our like who's most overrated by the fans section in our opinion. And Tyler Adams is one of our notable also rans here. So there's one thing that will like give me a sinking feeling in my stomach, and it's when Tyler Adams is on the ball and he goes to make a pass and he just like passes it to the other team in a really dangerous situation. He does that type of thing like far too often for my liking. He's got so many other skill sets that are really, really useful. His defensive work rate and his ability to track back. And I think he's a really good like stopper type covering player. But in build up, wow, it's lacking sometimes.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we've seen this a few different times in a few different games. I need to note that I brought this up in one of 11 Yanks posts, and he asked me to cite an example of how it's happened in the men's national team. And I went to the Dispossessed Cranks videos, which are a great source for anyone looking for game tape of the men's national team players. And I couldn't find any examples, but I do believe the last time I saw him do that for the men's national team, I think it was against Honduras, that there was a turnover out of our defensive third, and exactly what you're describing. There's these moments with Adams that I've noticed where he coughs up possession in really dangerous spots, or just like fails to make the read on his pass and puts it right at the feet of another defender or another player who intercepts the ball in a dangerous position. And I need to be a little bit more diligent about pointing those things out when I see them. But yeah, Tyler Adams, he's stood out to me, I think, for the last 3 to 4 months as somebody who's kind of failed to meet maybe what have been unfair expectations, but failed to meet expectations in some regard nonetheless.
Yeah, and all this being said, if you asked me who I was going to start at 6 next game, I would just tell you Tyler Adams.
Yeah,
Which
me too.
which I think really speaks to the depth issue we have in the deep lying central midfield position. And then another also ran here before we get into what our pick is Miles Robinson. And Al, you've been beating this drum a little bit. So what's your take here with Miles?
Yeah, so coming out of Syracuse, I believe that's where he went to college, Miles Robinson had some of the best combine numbers we've seen in the MLS combine, and the guy is really a freak of nature. An incredible vertical, an incredible 40 time, and you can see his speed and acceleration on full display every time he coughs up the ball in the midfield unnecessarily. And that's exactly what my issue is with Miles Robinson. He seems to be a player that's so physically gifted that he's able to cut corners technically, especially in the MLS. And those issues really start to reveal themselves on the men's national team. And it's one thing to be able to get away with it in the domestic league, but I think over the course of his career, he's become too reliant on his physical gifts, and the technical pieces of his game are missing. He's not off to a good start in the MLS season, and the fact that he's been log jammed into the starting 11, I mean, that's really more of a Berhalter decision than it is an assessment of the fans. But even when the fans are asked, I think there's this defensiveness of Miles Robinson, or this fascination with his physical gifts.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that assessment. I think that it is a over reliance on physical ability, and he gets caught out when he has to be going against people that also have physical gifts, but are used to playing at a higher level. So like against Canada, for example. But yeah, I guess we'll get into what our pick for the most overrated player by the fans is, and I think everyone probably sees it coming, but it has to be Ricardo Pepe. Just a few stats here, more or less. Pepe has not scored since the 7th of October. He hasn't had an assist since the 16th of November. It is currently, as we said at the beginning of the podcast, the 15th of March. It's a long time. And, it wouldn't be a big deal to say those type of things if he wasn't consistently getting listed by fans in their ideal starting 11s. There is a very clear disconnect between his on-field performance and the place which he holds in the fandom's collective conscience. It's really it's very, very clear that he's overrated by a large portion of the fan base. And it's actually to the point where people basically have anointed him as our 9 forever in a lot of ways. And
Exactly.
I got to be straight up. I honestly think he is closer right now to not getting called in next window, which will drop in, I don't know, maybe tomorrow even, than he is to being our go-to striker. Just based upon what his recent form is and how long it's been since he's scored. So yeah, I just think there's a huge disconnect between what Pepe actually does and what everybody thinks Pepe is.
I agree. That was really well said. I think even after he scored those heroic goals, and I believe it was against Honduras when he did it, that was his coming out party in the first World Cup qualifying fixture against Honduras. Even after that game, I believe we went on air and said, let's pump the brakes on this. It's a really small sample size. It's a really poor team that he showed up against. But Pepe had an outstanding first half of the season in MLS, and then the second half, his production fell off a cliff. It was really, I think it was after like an ankle injury that his production fell off. But this obsession with putting him as the forever 9 started in a moment where we were absolutely down and desperate. And if you look at the course of history and moments where things like this have happened before, where somebody or a group of people or a culture becomes obsessed with a leader or a figure, it oftentimes happens in moments of desperation. And so I can understand why the fans are like, man, he bailed us out. He scored the most goals out of any men's national team 9. He's the guy who picked us up when we were down. I stand by Pepe. I can understand that mentality, but to not take into account the phenomena that was occurring when he did score, I think is a mistake. And for that reason, and really more the reason of his performances of late, Pepe, for me, is the most overrated player in our player pool.
Yeah, and quite honestly, with Pepe right now, I think the best thing for him is just being allowed to be himself and get better. He doesn't need the mantle of U.S. men's national team 9 until he's 30. So right now, he's got plenty of time to improve and work on his craft, and we really should give him that time and not be so obsessed with him like having to be considered the best 9 that we have. But yeah, after we've beaten that horse enough, I guess we'll go. Yeah, we'll go on to. We'll go on to who is most overrated by the coach. And the also-rans in this section are basically, it's just the MLS guys that are mediocre. So for me, this list is Roldan, Lletget, Areola. Zardes is pretty close to being actually my pick for most overrated by the coach, but I got another guy for, I think, valid reasons. And then I threw Aaron Long in here, but I think he's kind of the wild card of this group because he keeps getting included like tangentially into the squads, and he's given like deference in terms of being able to do rehab.
And a whole bunch of like beat writers, MLS beat writers, are like, "Is this guy going to be the difference maker for us come World Cup time?" And it's like, "Are you foreshadowing something horrible?
Are you grooming us, you perverts?" Like, yeah, they're all bald perverts. But yeah, with Aaron Long, it's like he hasn't actually been jammed into a starting lineup when he shouldn't have been. So I can't. I got to give him second place at the best. Um, but yeah, for me, the coach's pick here is the coach's or our pick for most overrated by the coach is Jordan Morris. The reasoning here is that he was slotted into World Cup qualification and then started our last game against Honduras despite being injured for like a really long time. And then I think he played like a handful of competitive MLS games at the end of the season and then that friendly against Bosnia. And there's such a huge disconnect between what he had the ability to do on the field since recovering from his injury and like what you should have to do in order to get treated like he's getting treated by Berhalter, that I have to make him the most overrated guy by Berhalter. I mean, I guess Morris had a bunch of time to like watch Berhalter PowerPoints while he was injured, so it probably gave him a leg up. But it's yeah, it's Jordan Morris for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I concur. I agree with that assessment. I think there are a lot of players who actually have been or are in similar situations to Morris. I wouldn't say are. It's actually has been because Morris had a chance at Swansea, and that's where he sustained his ACL injury, isn't it? At
Yes.
Swansea, yeah. Um, but regardless, like he wasn't integrated back into the squad. He went back to the Sounders afterwards, and I think we've seen other players like Richie Ledesma, for example, who goes down with an ACL injury and PSV decide to like maintain their investment in the player and continue working with him. But there are other players who are playing at a championship level. Like one of the guys who stands out to me is like Dwayne Holmes. Like he's a slightly different player than Morris, but not so wildly different that he wouldn't occupy the exact same position that Morris occupies on the men's national team. Or Dante Seeley, who could actually serve a lot of different purposes for us. I'm not saying that those two dudes are shoo-ins to the roster, but they have had professional experiences similar to Morris, and they've taken their game to a level that's put them in a position to exceed what Morris has ever done at a professional level. So to see the resume of Jordan Morris and to see his consistent inclusion is it's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, it is confusing. It really doesn't make a ton of sense in our minds. Al, do you have anything else to go off of here for overrated by the coach before we move on to our last closing remarks?
I don't have a ton. I guess I would just say that like the center back pairings, I think like our lack of experimenting with the center back pairings and this sense of conviction, both by the coach and some of the fans, that the center back pairings in Robinson and Zimmerman is appropriate, I think is misguided. But that's it, and I don't want to throw in too much more info on that front.
All right. Well, yeah. So we're going to close this overrated out by a theme that I noticed. I think, Al, you probably noticed it as well.
A lot more present on Twitter than it was on Reddit.
Yeah, for for the player type that was getting overrated, and I found a bit confusing. But what does it mean to consider players who don't get called up often, if at all, to be the overrated ones? It's to me a weird thing to latch onto. If you're saying that someone who's not being called up is overrated, there's likely some sort of bias associated with that perspective. Because they're not. Who are they getting overrated by exactly? Like fans that call for them to continuously be called up. Yeah, I guess that's fair enough. But there's no institutional, like the coach isn't overrating them certainly, and oftentimes the people that get called overrated like this are ones that just happen to be competitive with favorites. So like if you call them P folk overrated, I don't know, man. You might just have a Pepe crush. If you're calling CCV overrated, I don't know. There's there's something to be said about
You
being
might
maybe the
really like.
best center back
Yeah.
in Scotland. Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, it's the same thing. It's like you might really love Zimmerman or you might really love Robinson.
Yeah, and
The
if
weird thing about it is like a lot of these like players like the De La Torres, the CCVs, the Eric Palmer Browns, the Jordan P folks that are getting called overrated. Like my gut reaction is to be like, no, that's underrated.
yeah, exactly. And we haven't. I intended on posting another thing. Maybe we should do that here. Unless we'll do something different for next week. But who is underrated might be another side to the coin here. But I don't know. A week from now, I think things will be a little bit different in U.S. men's national team fandom.
I think that's a great call, man. We should do that.
All right. Well, let's do it. Maybe over the weekend or maybe tomorrow, and see what kind of reactions we get.
I'm on paternity leave, dude, so I'm just on Reddit and Twitter all day. My mind's going to shit.
Going, he says.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. I mean, no one has any reason to tune into our podcast anymore, knowing that I'm full on loony.
I would tune
Don't
in
say it.
for
Whatever.
that.
Yeah, whatever you're gonna
Don't
say, don't say it.
don't say it. All right. You don't even give me time to react and come back at you. But yeah, that's all we got for tonight, folks. Have a good one. Roster drop is coming soon, so we'll be back at you with something on that. In all likelihood, we'll be doing a podcast with Linners and Woozers. Bring it back to how we were doing some of those roster drops in the fall. So it'll be nice to circle back with them. Alex, you got anything before I cut this recording off?
Nah. I mean, peace and booty grease, but that's all I got.
All right, the man said it. Have a good night, everybody.